He chose the house for its unassuming facade. A small brick bungalow, dark windows, no car in the driveway. Easy peasy, he thought.
He jimmied the back door with the practiced ease of a seasoned pro, or so he thought. The door creaked open like a tortured whale, not so smooth.
He stepped inside, his heart already doing a frantic tap dance against his ribs. The living room was dim, lit only by the sliver of moonlight filtering through the curtains. Dust motes danced in the air, illuminated by the moonbeams.
He pulled a flashlight from his backpack, its beam cutting through the darkness. He scanned the room, his eyes alighting on a dusty old gramophone, a chipped china cabinet displaying porcelain dolls with vacant eyes, and a faded floral couch that looked like it had been through the ringer. Not exactly a treasure trove.
He crept further into the house, his sneakers squeaking on the hardwood floor. He was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, he'd chosen the wrong house. This place reeked of mothballs and forgotten dreams, not riches. He reached the hallway, his flashlight illuminating a series of closed doors.
He whipped around, his flashlight beam dancing wildly. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the light from the hallway, was a figure that could only be described as formidable. Tall and imposing, with a shock of white hair and eyes that glittered like ice in the darkness. He wore a tweed jacket over a neatly pressed shirt, and his expression was one of stern disapproval. The kind of disapproval that could curdle milk. "Who are you?" he stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager going through puberty. "What do you want?" He felt a sudden urge to drop his backpack, raise his hands, and explain that this was all a big misunderstanding. He was in the wrong line of work. Maybe he should have been a librarian, they always looked so calm and collected.
"I believe those are questions I should be asking you," the homeowner said, his voice as smooth and polished as marble. "You are in my house, uninvited, in the middle of the night. I think that qualifies as breaking and entering, wouldn't you agree?"
"Look," he said, his voice a desperate whisper. "I didn't mean any harm, I just needed some money, that's all." He felt a surge of shame as he said the words. He was a grown man, for crying out loud, and here he was, reduced to begging for mercy from a guy who probably had a pension plan and a subscription to National Geographic.
The homeowner raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. "Money, you say? And you thought the best way to acquire this money was to break into my humble abode? How curious." He paused, his gaze piercing. "Tell me, young man, what are your qualifications?"
"Qualifications for what?" he sputtered, completely bewildered. Narrator. Qualifications? The robber blinked. Was this guy serious? He was being interviewed for a job he didn't even want.
The homeowner smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent shivers down his spine. "Why, to be my student, of course," he said, his voice as smooth as silk. "You see, I have a rather unconventional method of reforming wayward souls like yourself."
Before the robber could even utter a protest, he was being ushered down the hallway, his backpack confiscated, his future uncertain. He was led into a small Spartan room with a single bed, a desk piled high with books, and a bare light bulb dangling from the ceiling. It looked less like a bedroom, and more like a prison cell. He was handed a stack of textbooks, a syllabus outlining a rigorous curriculum, and a stern warning: there would be no escape from this academic purgatory. His days became a blur of lectures, essays, and endless exams. He struggled with algebra, fumbled through history, and could barely string together a coherent sentence in English. His nights were spent hunched over his desk, his brain aching, his eyelids drooping. He dreamt of freedom, of open roads and wallets fat with cash. But those dreams were always shattered by the harsh reality of his current situation. He was a prisoner of knowledge, trapped in a world of conjugations, equations, and historical dates. He learned about the French Revolution, the Pythagorean theorem, and the intricacies of the human circulatory system. He discovered the beauty of Shakespeare's sonnets, the power of Dickens's prose, and the haunting melodies of Chopin's nocturnes. He began to see the world through new eyes, his mind expanding, his horizons broadening. He was still a robber at heart, but a robber with a newfound appreciation for the finer things in life, the things that couldn't be stolen, only earned.
"You know, you're not half bad at this whole learning thing. You've got a good head on your shoulders when you choose to use it."
He felt a surge of pride, a warmth that spread through his chest. He'd never been good at anything in his life except maybe hot wiring a car. But here he was, being praised for his intellect, his ability to grasp complex concepts. He had to admit it felt pretty good.
Weeks turned into months. He settled into a routine, a bizarre mix of academic rigor and domesticity. He cooked and cleaned, tended the garden, and even helped the homeowner with his taxes. He became less a prisoner and more a reluctant apprentice, learning the art of reformation, one textbook at a time.
He'd discovered a part of himself he never knew existed, a thirst for knowledge, a desire to understand the world around him. He looked at the homeowner, a man who had taken him, a common thief, and turned him into a student. A man who had seen something in him, some spark of potential that no one else had ever noticed.
He felt a strange sense of gratitude, a feeling that was both unexpected and deeply unsettling. Maybe there was more to life than just grabbing what you could and running. Maybe there was something to be said for knowledge, for understanding, for expanding your horizons beyond the narrow confines of your own selfish desires.
He introduced them to his student, a young man who had found himself on the wrong side of the law and was now being rehabilitated through the power of knowledge.
The police officers, thoroughly charmed and slightly confused, left without making an arrest. They seemed to have accepted the homeowner's unconventional methods, even praising him for his civic duty.
He was free to go, free to return to his old life of crime, but something held him back. He had tasted the forbidden fruit of knowledge, and it was sweeter than he ever imagined.
One day, a police car pulled up outside the house. Two officers, looking official and slightly bewildered, stood on the doorstep. They were investigating a string of recent robberies, they explained, and their leads had led them here. The homeowner, with a twinkle in his eye, invited them in for tea and a lively discussion about the merits of classical education.
He decided to stay. He continued his studies, delving deeper into the world of literature, philosophy, and history. He even enrolled in a local community college, eager to test his newfound knowledge in a more formal setting. He excelled in his classes, surprising his professors with his insightful observations and sharp wit.
Remember those days when you couldn't conjugate a verb to save your life? He chuckled, shaking his head. He'd recount the early days of their forced companionship, when every lesson was a battle of wills, every exam a test of endurance.
They'd both laugh, but the laughter held a hint of something deeper, a shared understanding of the journey they'd taken together. As for the former robber-turned-student, he never quite shook off his past. He still had moments when he'd eye a shiny watch or a carelessly placed wallet with a flicker of longing. But now, instead of acting on those impulses, he'd reach for a book, his fingers tracing the worn spines, his mind lost in worlds far removed from the petty temptations of the material world.
The homeowner's unorthodox method of reformation, it seemed, had yielded unexpected results. He had taken a thief, a lost soul seeking solace in the shadows, and brought him into the light of knowledge. He had shown him that there was more to life than just taking what you could get. That true wealth lay in the pursuit of understanding, the expansion of the mind, the endless quest for knowledge.
Whether this unconventional approach to rehabilitation could be replicated on a larger scale remained to be seen. Perhaps it was simply a case of two peculiar individuals finding common ground in the most unexpected of circumstances. Or perhaps it was a testament to the transformative power of education, the ability of knowledge to illuminate even the darkest corners of the human soul. Whatever the reason, one thing was certain: the robber who became a student had found something far more valuable than anything he could have ever stolen. He had found himself.